West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
But we begin with the January 6th hearing and that testimony about Donald Trump's angry reaction to the Supreme Court's refusal to participate in his attempts to overturn the election. Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger told that story.
On December 11th, Trump's allies lost a lawsuit in the U.S. Supreme Court that he regarded as his last chance at success in the courts. A newly obtained Secret Service message from that day shows how angry President Trump was about the outcome. Quote, "Just FYI, POTUS is pissed. Breaking news, Supreme Court denied his lawsuit. He is livid now." Cassidy Hutchison, an aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, was present for that conversation and described it in this way.
This is the day that the Supreme Court had rejected that case. Mr. Meadows and I were in the White House residence at a Christmas reception. And as we were walking back from the Christmas reception that evening, the president was walking out of the Oval Office, so we crossed paths in the Rose Garden colonnade. The president was fired up about the Supreme Court decision. And so I was standing next to Mr. Meadows, but I stepped back, so I was probably 2-3 feet catty corner from him, diagonal from him. The president's just raging about the decision and how it's wrong and why didn't we make more calls, and just his typical anger outburst at this decision. And the president said he had said something to the effect of, "I don't want people to know we lost, Mark. This is embarrassing. Figure it out. We need to figure it out. I don't want people to know that we lost."
The point of that testimony in the case of the January 6th committee was making today was that Donald Trump knew that he lost the election. That was the point of that testimony. Establishing that Donald Trump knew that he lost the election is a crucial element in proving everything Donald Trump did to overturn the election was intentionally criminal, including his phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, demanding that the secretary find 11,000 votes for Donald Trump. A recording of that phone call was played once again today by the January 6th committee, and we will be covering more on that later in this hour. But there is another element of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony that you just heard. Her description of Donald Trump's anger about the Supreme Court decision that is worth zooming in on, a phrase we should zoom in on. She said the president was just raging about the decision and how it's wrong, and why didn't we make more calls? And just this typical anger outburst at this decision. Why didn't we make more calls about a Supreme Court decision? Calls to whom? Why didn't we make more calls to the Supreme Court? Does that mean calls to Supreme Court justices appointed by Donald Trump? Does that mean calls to Supreme Court clerks? Does that mean calls to Virginia Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who we know from her text messages was in constant communication with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in her attempts to illegally overturn the election? Donald Trump just lost in the Supreme Court, and he's angrily asking, why didn't we make more calls? It has been established that Donald Trump knows that Mark Meadows was in constant communication with the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Did Donald Trump order Mark Meadows to call Virginia Thomas to try to interfere with the Supreme Court decision? Did Mark Meadows obey such an order if he was given one? Or did he defy such an order if he was given one? Is this one of the many reasons why Mark Meadows has fought a subpoena to testify to the January 6th committee? Why didn't we make more calls about a Supreme Court decision? Some of the most striking new evidence in today's hearing was the video recorded by Speaker Nancy Pelosi's daughter while the congressional leadership was gathered at Fort McNair, 2 miles from the Capitol.
You know what? We have got to finish the proceedings, or else they're going to have a complete victory. There has to be some way we can maintain the sense that people have that there's some security or some confidence that government can function and that we can elect the President of the United States. Did we go back into session?
We did go back into session, but now apparently everybody on the floor is putting on tear gas masks to prepare for a breach. I'm trying to get more information.
They're putting on their
Tear gas masks.
I'm going to call up the effing Secretary of DOD. We have some senators who are still in their hideaways. They need massive personnel now. Can you get the Maryland National Guard to come too?
I have something to say, Mr. Secretary. Well, I'm going to call the mayor of Washington, D.C. right now and see what other outreach she has to other police departments, as Leader Hoyer has mentioned. Hi, Governor. This is Nancy. Governor, I don't know if you have been approached about the Virginia National Guard. Mr. Hoyer was speaking to Governor Hogan, but I still think you probably need the okay of the federal government in order to come into another jurisdiction. Thank you.
Secretary of the Army.
Oh my gosh, they're just breaking windows. They're doing all kinds of. It's really that they said somebody was shot. It's just horrendous, and all at the instigation of the President of the United States. Okay, thank you, Governor. I appreciate what you're doing, and if you don't mind, I'd like to stay in touch. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Virginia Guard has been called in.
You know, I'm just talking to Governor Northam, and what he said is they sent 200 state police and a unit of the National Guard. They're breaking windows and going in, obviously ransacking our offices and all the rest of that. That's nothing. The concern we have about personal harm, personal safety it just transcends everything. But the fact is, on any given day, they're breaking the law in many different ways. And quite frankly, much of it at the instigation of the President of the United States. And now, if he could at least somebody.
Yeah, why don't you get the President to tell them to leave the Capitol, Mr. Attorney General, in your law enforcement responsibility. A public statement, they should all leave.
It is Friday, the 14th of October of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Indeed we are. Okay, well, the hits keep on a-coming, kids. It's great. I actually enjoyed the January 6th hearing yesterday. But we're in the weeds with it, so of course we find it not only informative but entertaining as hell. Oh, boy, takes us back, doesn't it? When a breaking story was a breaking story, and what was one of the many breaking stories that we were privy to yesterday? Well, it looks like the Secret Service had a reason to scrub every single one of their phones. But it wasn't enough, because we still had emails and DMs on other types of platforms. They were able to get to the recipients' devices and then be able to discern where the message originated from. Would have been nice to still have all those phones and all that communication that went on January 6th, wouldn't it have been? Or even January 4th. Because it looks like the Secret Service was up to their necks in intel about it, and they either did nothing or there was many inside that bureau. Are they a bureau? That organization, that agency, who were in on it. And the emphasis on it is the insurrection. They were privy and a part of it. A part, not a part. They were part of it. So it begs the question. What did the Secret Service know about the pipe bombs they did not protect Kamala from? And when did they know it? That's a question I'd like to beg. Oh, yeah. Among a few others. The other bombshell that we learned later on, and that was only because Jen Psaki was brought in on the MSNBC after-game panel, after-hearing panel, where she was asked a question about the transition, and she said that she had asked her colleagues and others if anybody got a briefing from the Secret Service about the danger that January 6th afforded to them, particularly. Nope. No sit down with anybody. Not even Joe. All right. So I would suggest that maybe, just maybe, I have to, I don't know, bend a few rules. Have they never been bent in the previous administration? Huh? Maybe it does take a few rules bent. But maybe the Secret Service actually needs to be completely purged and start from scratch. And I mean also taking it out of the DHS and putting it back into Treasury. Because it seems to me when it got put into DHS, that is the demarcation where we can see that agency going to hell. Now, maybe there was always a bit of partying and carousing and, getting drunk and driving cars drunk and, threatening prostitutes in foreign countries, whatever. Maybe that always happened and we just never heard about it. Or maybe, just maybe, putting it into DHS, which was a construct because of, I don't know, disaster capitalism, that sort of behavior after 9/11. Oh, look, we can use this disaster and put in this totally Teutonic thing that we've been wanting all along. Homeland? When they said homeland, I thought, what am I supposed to do? Give you a stiff arm salute? My God, homeland. All right. Set it up like the Gestapo, and what do you think's going to happen? I know the Gestapo, you could say, was very efficient in rooting out all the people they hated and killing them. But they were also rife with corruption, graft, bribing, any number of things, even murder of their own kind, the Night of the Long Knives, over and over and over. And what do we see now? A Department of the Homeland Security set up like the Gestapo, and I'm not kidding. And all of the attendant problems, including the corruption, the graft, and everything else. Maybe the big M word, too. I don't know. But something needs to change, and maybe putting it back under the purview of Treasury rather than the Department of Homeland Security, Sieg Heil, might be a good idea. Might be. All right. Well, what else? Trump lost another Supreme Court hearing. They just summarily said, denied. All right. He was really counting on Clarence to, not put it to the full panel of the Supreme Court. He was really open for that. And like Lawrence's story at the top, where when he lost in the Supreme Court back then, and he ranted and raged and carried on, and then maintained, as we found out yesterday as well, that he felt he should have made more calls. More calls to whom? Clarence? So in this instance, from yesterday, when he was summarily denied by the full court, denied. I'm sure he's raging and ranting that he should have made more calls. To Ginny? Nah, I don't think he talks to Ginny. He has somebody else talk to Ginny. But he might talk to Clarence direct. And he might talk to Brett, too. Now, I think that to talk to Amy, he has to go through her male handlers, the chaperones first. I think that's how that works. And he's not gonna talk to Kagan. Let's be clear. Can you imagine that? I'd like to hear those invectives. Oh my God. Anyway, he probably tried to make more calls, and John Roberts said, foul ball. Finally calls a Republican foul ball instead of another hit. I got to tell you, that John Roberts, for a balls and strikes umpire judge, he calls a lot of Republican foul balls hits. But not this time. They did not want to dirty their hands with, because they're already dirty. Maybe they see the writing on the wall. And the writing on the wall is that they've been putting this fascist takeover of America for decades. It's been decades in the making. Trump didn't start this. Trump was just another convenient vehicle. Disaster capitalism. Look what we got. He's creating disaster after disaster. Let's have the fascist takeover we've always wanted. No more Roe. That'll show them. Dirty hippies. Which reminds me, I was trying to make a joke on the Bird app, Tweet, and I failed miserably, because I said something like, it turns out that all the hippies that had their head in the clouds and couldn't face reality, yada yada yada, turned into maggots, But what I was trying to say is that it's funny, because all the squares back in the day that were kicking the hippies for having their head in the clouds and whatever. So how do you explain maggots right now? Because they don't seem like hippies to me. I will admit that when I came back to Oregon to care for my elderly mother, I was astounded about how many Nazi pot growers there are around here. My God. But it's a steady stream of cash, because that's all that they can deal in. No banks are allowed. So when Nazi groups were bankrupted back in the day for their violence, they found a way to recoup all those funds that they were not able to get just from selling newsletters. It's a lot of Nazi pot growers around here. Ain't love, peace, and understanding, I got to tell you. So, there we are. Everything is upside down. And Trump's maybe will get his way, maybe not. But the point remains is that I think that by and large, the maggot GOP is moving on because it's a movement. It's not tied to one man, no matter how much orange pancake makeup he applies and how fluffy his air-fluffed comb-over bouffant is. I love how people, Bridget Gabriel, or is it Birgit, whatever, that Gabriel gal, who maintains that, Trump is so manly, so manly. I don't know, a comb-over fluffy bouffant's not my idea of manly, let alone the pancake makeup. Can't someone apply that a little bit better? I mean, can't they blend around the cheek? It's like they put a ring around his face and spray it. Come on, blend that stuff into the neck and behind the ear. Come on. I thought you guys knew about stagecraft. Who knows? All right. And then you got Nick Adams saying that he's an alpha male and he's not going to deny it. I got to tell you, Nick, alpha males never have to maintain or publicly announce that they are alpha males. That's why they are alpha males. So, you little cuck, get out of here. Oh, man. Go back to Australia where you belong. Yeah, that's where Nick Adams comes from. He adopts some sort of like American persona from the 50s. Persona, an actor, actually. Quite a good one, I thought. And he's traipsing around like he's Nick Adams. Yeah. Detective extraordinaire. Sure you are. You're a shrimp on the Barbie, pal. Alpha male. Give me a break. Okay, well, enough of, swinging my you-know-what around. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm elderly, but I still have a little bit of testosterone that's addling my brain. I try to keep it in check. I try. Okay, well, let's get into the curated part of the show because, well, even though it's Blue Moon Spirits Fridays and we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life, we do have a menu here, and why don't we take a look? Okay, well, we already went over what Lawrence divulged, so on the rest of the menu, people with disabilities are left out of climate planning. Like, how do you get somebody in a wheelchair out of a flood zone when they're trapped in their attic, for instance? The Carter Center will provide nonpartisan observers to monitor midterm elections in Fulton County, Georgia. They're actually known for going into foreign countries and doing the same thing just to make sure it's a fair election. And Ohio Democrats are wondering why their party is not backing Senate contender Tim Ryan more forcefully. And we can all wonder that. What's up? After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the U.S. government had to prod Google and other tech companies to help Iranian protesters. And Putin tempted Turkey with suggestions of making it Europe's new gas hub. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room, link across the page at our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon site. And what kind of site is that? Well, that's a site where you can become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. And how do you become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio? Well, one simple way would be to, well, send us the funds of what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance. If you could send those funds to us once a month, that helps us pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this powerhouse of resistance against dark forces arrayed against representative democracy here in the great United States of America and around the world. We be but a small bulwark against that, but we also be mighty. And it's because of you. So thank you. And thank you for your generosity in the future as well, because I got to tell you, it doesn't look like they are going anywhere. And that means that we got to keep fighting, and we will. So thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. I take care of me, and who am I? Well, I am at Justice Putnam on Twitter. That's my persona, and it happens to be me. And the reason that you should follow me there in terms of West Coast Cookbook, Speakeasy, for instance, is because 10 minutes before showtime, I publish the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's, and you can find those links to the full reportage and the complete articles, by the way, by following those links. And you can find them if you follow me on Twitter. So there. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And also pick up the Deep Archive, the library, the Netroots Radio Library of the past 11 plus years at the Internet Archive at archive.org. Okay. Well, we have the niceties out of the way. Let's get down to brass tacks. Brass tacks? This isn't a rug shop. This is a salon. We already have everything tacked in, but Drew Costley of the Associated Press does bring us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. When the inevitable hurricanes threaten New Orleans, it's hard for India Scott to figure out where to go. In the city where she was born and raised, she stayed in hotels, relief shelters, and, during Hurricane Katrina, in the famously overcrowded Superdome. But it's always a gamble choosing where to seek refuge. A lot of places that are safe for most people are not safe for her because they are not accessible to people like her, people living with disabilities. Scott has used a wheelchair her entire life. She was born with a disability. Even when the weather is calm in New Orleans, she is reluctant to leave home to visit friends or go out to shop or eat because places outside her house cannot guarantee that she'll be able to maneuver even basic things like using the restroom, passing through an entryway, or getting into bed. Scott's house in the Algiers neighborhood of New Orleans is comfortable with features that are required by code, yet often missing, like widened entryways for her wheelchair. It has a bed lower to the ground that's easier to get in and out of, but because she lives near a levee, she leaves that comfort behind whenever a major hurricane or tropical storm is forecast, because rising flood water that would challenge anyone would surely be fatal for her. Scott said she cannot rely on the city, state, or federal government when storms come, only friends. Wow, that sounds like a libertarian's dream, isn't it? Except the libertarian doesn't want to be anybody's friend. In this reporter's opinion, She said there is inadequate support for disabled people before, during, and after disasters from emergency management agencies at all levels of government. We're on our own, she said through cheers to the Associated Press. Experts and activists echoed her view, telling the AP people with disabilities are left out of emergency and disaster planning and face hurdles that able-bodied people don't when disasters strike. As climate-related disasters become more common and more severe, most countries in the world are neglecting their obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of persons with disabilities in their responses to the climate crisis, according to a June report from the Disability Inclusive Climate Action Research Program at McGill University and the International Disability Alliance. The researchers found that only 32 of 192 countries that are signatories to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change's Paris Climate Accords in 2015 refer to people with disabilities in their official climate plans. 45 countries refer to disabled people in their climate adaptation policies, and no country, I'll repeat that, no country mentions disabled people in its climate mitigation plans. Many of the world's biggest contributors to climate change, the United States, China, Russia, Brazil, Germany, Japan, and the United Kingdom, don't figure people with disabilities into any of these plans, according to the report. That is despite the fact that 185 countries ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, drafted in 2006, which says that countries will take, quote, all necessary measures to ensure the protection and safety of persons with disabilities in humanitarian emergencies and the occurrence of natural disasters, end quote. The U.S. was one of 8 countries that signed the treaty but have not ratified it. Bill Barrow of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Carter Center will provide nonpartisan observers to monitor midterm elections in Fulton County, Georgia, a Democratic bastion at the heart of Metro Atlanta and at the core of Donald Trump's false assertions that the 2020 presidential election was rigged. The Carter Center, co-founded in 1982 by former President Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter, announced it agreed to observe Fulton voting and vote counting at the request of a bipartisan group of Georgia election officials. The move is seemingly intended to ease partisan tensions over how elections are conducted in the state and boost public confidence in the final tallies. But it also comes as part of a new state law that Georgia Republicans could use to take over elections management in the heavily Democratic county that is home to Atlanta. Elections monitoring internationally has been part of the Carter Center's operations for decades, but it has more recently turned its attention to U.S. elections, as distrust in democratic processes has accelerated in recent years. After the 2020 election, Carter Center officials monitored the audit of the state's 5 million presidential ballots that affirmed Democrat Joe Biden's victory over Trump. The monitoring request is the latest turn after Georgia Republicans overhauled election laws after Democratic victories in the state in 2020. Soon after the law was passed in 2021, GOP lawmakers from Fulton County used it to trigger a, quote, performance review panel, end quote, charged with assessing elections management in the heavily Democratic jurisdiction, meaning a lot of black people. That prompted an outcry from Democrats asserting that Republicans planned ultimately to oust local Fulton officials and take over local elections administration. The law, however, does not exclude third-party monitors, thus allowing the joint request to the Carter Center by the review panel members and local Fulton officials. Officials from both groups endorsed the Carter Center's role. Carter Center officials, according to the announcement, are monitoring the issuance and processing of absentee ballots, in-person voting during the early voting period and on Election Day, Fulton officials' Election Day operations, and post-election procedures in the county. The center has promised a complete report of its findings by the end of the year. Fulton County accounts for about 11% of Georgia's electorate. Biden won nearly 73% of the county's votes in November of 2020. He won statewide by fewer than 12,000 votes out of about 5 million cast. The county is about 45.5% white, 44.5% black, and about 7.6% people of Asian descent, according to U.S. Census data. And Julie Carr-Smythe of the Associated Press bring us this final offering in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Democrats across Ohio are pleading for help in the state Senate contest, afraid they may lose a winnable election unless national party leaders make major investments in the coming days. So far, the most powerful groups in Democratic politics have prioritized Senate pickup opportunities in North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania over Ohio, once a perennial swing state that veered right in the Trump era. But on the eve of the 2022 midterms, some public polls suggest Ohio is as competitive as the other swing states, leaving many Democrats here wondering why their party is not backing Senate contender Tim Ryan more forcefully. Ryan, a 10-term congressman, said in an interview that party leaders who believe he cannot win have no idea what's going on out here. I've come to terms with the fact that we're probably not going to get any help. I'm playing with the team we got on the field, Ryan said. I can't think of anything more Ohio than us taking on the entire political establishment at this point. The tension is a reflection of the difficult decisions Democratic leaders are facing about how to invest limited financial resources in the final weeks before the November 8 election. With a razor-thin Senate majority, any move could carry long-term consequences. If Republicans gain even one seat, they would take control of the Senate, and with it, gain power to control judicial nominations and President Joe Biden's legislative agenda. And if Ryan comes up short by just a few points, there will likely be an intense round of post-election questions about whether the party could have done more to win. The financial disparities in the race are stark. Republican J.D. Vance, a venture capitalist and author of Hillbilly Elegy, is the beneficiary of more than $30 million from outside Republican groups. They include organizations aligned with Donald Trump and Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. By contrast, Ryan has benefited from less than $4 million in outside spending so far. I think our Democratic leaders need to get on it. We need every seat. Every seat is competitive. A 50-state strategy needs to be had. And listen, put out the call, and people will donate even in the final weeks of before the midterms. So let's get on it. All right, let's also get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, everything isn't just fine. Don't Worry, Darling suffers from an identity problem. It's trying to be too many things at once. A social commentary, a psychological thriller, and perhaps worst of all, a vehicle for pop star Harry Styles to show that he is leading man material. Unfortunately, it falls short on the first two and really misses the mark on the last. In this second directorial offering from Olivia Wilde, Don't Worry, Darling tells the tale of Alice, played by Florence Pugh, and Jack, Harry Styles, a married couple living in the aptly named planned community of Victory, which is located in the middle of the California desert. Based on the homes, cars, and clothing, the setting appears to be the 1950s. However, the racial diversity and openness with regards to sexual matters sort of suggests otherwise. In fact, nothing is what it appears to be, and somehow Victory's founder, Frank, a powerful Chris Pine, who also happens to be the employer for all of Victory's male residents, is at the center of it all. Much like the Alice who found herself falling down a rabbit hole, this Alice too finds herself down such a hole, only what she finds is far from Wonderland. Without spoilers, the plot twist in this one can be finessed pretty early on. The cinematography and production design are spot on here, but Wilde still new at this directing thing, and the script's social commentary is often so heavy that it feels like you're being hit over the head with a pan from Alice's well-stocked kitchen. Don't Worry, Darling benefits from strong performances by Pugh and Pine, who offer the only glimpses of chemistry between anyone in this movie, as well as some neat visual stylings. Sadly, though, that's not quite enough to save it. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Good eating habits developed in childhood can last a lifetime, but getting children to eat their fruits and vegetables is a common problem. Eating them adds important nutrients, helps control weight, and reduces the risks for many serious illnesses. Children in the U.S. are eating more fruit. However, 60% of children get fewer fruits than recommended, and 93% don't get enough vegetables. Childcare, schools, and school districts can help change this by meeting or exceeding federal nutrition standards for meals and snacks, including fruits and vegetables wherever food is offered, and helping children learn about and taste fruits and vegetables. At home, parents can eat a variety of fruits and vegetables with their children and provide them as snacks, even if it takes many tries. Also, parents can include their children when shopping for, growing, and preparing fruits and vegetables. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
1 in 6 Americans get sick from eating contaminated food each year. Contamination caused by salmonella is especially common. It's sometimes found in poultry, eggs, ground beef, pork, and even peanut butter. To reduce your risk from this and other foodborne germs, remember to clean, separate, cook, and chill. Clean your hands with soap and water. Separate raw meat, poultry, and seafood from other foods. Wash counters, cutting boards, and utensils before and after using them. Cook all food thoroughly and use a food thermometer to make sure food is cooked. Promptly chill meat, poultry, eggs, and other perishables. Finally, don't prepare food for others if you're sick, and be extra careful when you prepare food for children, pregnant women, the elderly, or people in poor health. To learn more about making food safer to eat, visit www.cdc.gov/vital signs.
This is the story of a very special woman. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician or an entrepreneur. Her knowledge was limitless and still is. She could also make monsters disappear, especially those that lurked in the shadows under the bed. Once, this woman put back together a teenage girl's broken heart, which had been shattered in 1,000 pieces, just by giving her a bear hug. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. Vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
What is Question 4? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Last July, the Massachusetts legislature overwhelmingly voted for the Work and Family Mobility Act, a law that allows qualified Massachusetts residents to apply for a driver's license regardless of their immigration status. Before driving, the law requires the license applicant to be trained, tested, licensed, and insured. The law will allow immigrants without status to make essential trips to work, to get their kids to school, to medical appointments, and to the grocery store. Similar laws already exist in 17 other states, many of which have experienced measurable improvements in road safety. After all, in case of an accident, it's important that all parties have insurance and proper identification. One reason this law, this public safety measure, is supported by a majority of district attorneys and sheriffs and major city police chiefs. But after the law passed, an opposition group gathered enough signatures to put the issue on the ballot this November. The fourth question on the ballot is, should the law be retained? Please don't be confused by the wording of Question 4. Voting yes will keep the law in place. And remember to turn the ballot to the back. That's where Question 4 is printed. That's where you can vote in favor of both human rights and public safety by voting yes on Question 4. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1933. That was the day that the Executive Council of the American Federation of Labor decided to call for a boycott of Nazi Germany's goods and services. Jewish labor leaders in the United States led the push for the boycott. They were alarmed about the news coming from Germany since Adolf Hitler had taken over as chancellor that January. The day after the boycott decision, American Federation of Labor President William Green spoke with a reporter saying, "We found fresh justification for our action yesterday in today's announcement of Germany's withdrawal from the League of Nations and Disarmament Conference." In the months that followed the boycott, Jewish labor leaders continued to organize. In 1934, they formed the Jewish Labor Committee, a new organization headquartered in New York City. That year, the head of the Jewish Labor Committee, Baruch Charny-Valetic, addressed the convention of the American Federation of Labor in San Francisco. He urged for more union action. In response, the American Federation of Labor founded the Labor Chest. The fund was established to aid in refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. It was also to support public education about the rising threat of fascism. In 1936, the AFL's chairman of the Labor Chest, Matthew Wall, declared that the events in Germany, quote, concern us as deeply as the cause of labor, and that we shall spare no effort to help the victims of this regime. That same year, the Jewish Labor Committee organized a World Labor Athletic Carnival in New York City. The aim was to draw attention away from the Olympics that were being held in Nazi Germany. American Federation of Labor President William Green served as one of the honorary chairpersons for those games. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 48 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of about 90 as we were yesterday. Abundant sunshine, winds light and variable, clear skies overnight with lows once again in the low 50s, though dipping into the mid to upper 40s. Winds light and variable, and then mainly sunny skies tomorrow with highs around 90, maybe a bit warmer. Winds light and variable, and it looks like that will be the course of temperature for the weekend. And I know it's a little far out into the future, but it looks like we have a forecast of abundant rain beginning this next weekend. Not this coming, but next weekend. And where we live, we would like that to happen. Ragweed pollen is moderate right outside the window here in Rogue River proper at the moment. The air quality index for the region is good, though it's in the upper regions of the good range at 43 parts per million. And that daytime UV index is at its autumn moderate range at level 4. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.97 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles. And relative humidity is at 90%. 90. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 61 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 61 with rain. Rome is 77 degrees and fair. Kyiv is 51 and fair. Kabul is 56 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 77 and fair. Tokyo is 67 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 56 and clear. San Francisco, California is 53 degrees and cloudy. And New York, New York is 58 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Joseph Menn and Yasmin Abudaleb of the Washington Post brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Though Yasmin Green fled Iran with her parents at 3 years old, she has never been more involved in the struggle of its people. Recently elevated to chief executive of an elite research team at Google, Green, now age 40, has refocused that New York group, known as Jigsaw, on aiding oppressed populations as well as fending off attacks on more open societies. Now one of the unit's products, a free virtual private network, or VPN, that lets users hide their internet tracks better than most paid versions, is surging in Iran, helping participants in the most widespread protests that have occurred there in years evade a growing crackdown on communications. The VPN, called Outline, is available on its own as an app or web download and in versions distributed by third parties. The government backing for the third-party Nth Link comes as the Biden administration steps up its efforts to assist Iranians supportive of the protests. Top White House officials have said they are trying to heed the lessons of the 2009 Iran protests over disputed elections, when government forces brutally cracked down, but the Obama administration did not weigh in publicly for the first several days of the protests before eventually condemning the Iranian government. This time around, the White House took a stronger stance from the beginning, but is careful not to take attention away from the Iranian protesters. U.S. officials feel they can be most helpful to protesters through their public messaging and by prodding tech companies to provide services as the Iranian government continues to crack down.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Susan Fraser and Dasha Litvinova of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Vladimir Putin doubled down on his proposal to turn Turkey into a gas hub for Europe after deliveries to Germany through the Baltic Sea's Nord Stream pipeline were halted. Putin floated the idea of exporting more gas through the Turk Stream gas pipeline running beneath the Black Sea to Turkey as he met with Turkish President Erdogan on the sidelines of a regional summit in Kazakhstan. It's the second unlikely energy proposal that Putin has pitched in as many days, with European leaders calling Russia's cuts in natural gas a political bid to divide them over their support for Ukraine. It's created an energy crisis heading into winter that has fueled inflation, forced some industries to cut production, and sent utility bills soaring. NATO member Turkey, which is depending on Russia for its energy needs and tourism, has criticized Moscow's actions in Ukraine, but has not joined U.S. and European sanctions against Russia. Although Russia is still conveying gas to Europe via Ukraine, the amount has plummeted drastically with the 2 Baltic pipelines out of commission. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline never came on stream because Germany blocked its operation just before Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, l'âge tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, l'âge tendre. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.